In a quiet little town tucked away in the Appalachian Mountains, an old man named Harold sat on his porch, staring up at the night sky. The wooden boards beneath him creaked softly as he shifted his weight, and the cool mountain air carried the faint scent of pine. His wrinkled hands rested on his knees, fingers tapping absent-mindedly against the fabric of his worn jeans. For years, Harold had been trying to warn people about the dangers of humanity's endless quest for power and knowledge. But no one listened really. To most folks in town, Harold was just an eccentric old man who liked to talk about the past too much. Harold wasn't always this way. Once, he'd been a respected member of the community, someone people turned to for advice. Back then, he'd spent hours sharing stories passed down from his grandparents, tales of ancient wisdom and cautionary lessons about tampering with forces beyond human understanding. But as time went on, fewer people came to hear him speak. The younger generation dismissed his words as outdated superstitions, relics of a simpler time when science couldn't explain everything. And so, Harold found himself alone, watching the world change around him while feeling powerless to stop it. Far away from Harold's quiet life, in sleek labs filled with humming machines and glowing screens, ambitious scientists worked tirelessly on projects that would shape the future of humanity. Among them was Daniel Carter, a brilliant physicist known for his relentless drive and sharp mind. Daniel had always believed that humanity's greatest strength lay in its ability to push boundaries, to explore the unknown without fear. He didn't care much for warnings or cautionary tales. To him, progress meant taking risks, even if those risks scared others. Daniel's latest project took place deep beneath the frozen expanse of Antarctica, where teams of researchers had uncovered something extraordinary. Buried under layers of ice was an object unlike anything anyone had ever seen, strange metallic artifact that seemed to hum with energy. It was smooth and cold to the touch, its surface etched with intricate patterns that glowed faintly in the dark. No one knew what it was or where it came from, but everyone agreed on one thing: it held immense potential. Rachel Monroe, another key figure in the research team, shared Daniel's excitement, but approached the discovery with more restraint. She was a chemist by training, meticulous and detail-oriented, with a deep respect for the scientific method. While Daniel dreamed of harnessing the artifact's power to revolutionize energy production, Rachel focused on studying its properties, carefully documenting every observation in painstaking detail. Still, even she couldn't deny the allure of the possibilities it presented. News of the artifact spread quickly, capturing the attention of governments, corporations, and media outlets worldwide. People speculated endlessly about its origins and purpose. Was it evidence of extraterrestrial life? A remnant of an advanced civilization long gone? Or something else entirely? Whatever it was, everyone wanted a piece of it. Funding poured into the project, and pressure mounted on the team to deliver results fast. Back in the mountains, Harold watched all of this unfold from afar. News reports filled his small television screen with images of gleaming laboratories and confident scientists promising breakthroughs that would change the world forever. Each announcement made Harold's heart sink a little deeper. He tried reaching out to local officials, writing letters and making phone calls, urging them to halt the experiments before it was too late. But his pleas were met with worse, ridicule. Times have changed, one official told him bluntly. We can't afford to live in fear anymore. Harold knew better than to give up completely. One evening, he decided to visit the library in the nearby town, hoping to find some scrap of information that might help him make sense of what was happening. The librarian, a kind woman named Mary, greeted him warmly and helped him locate books on ancient myths and legends. As Harold flipped through dusty pages, he stumbled upon references to objects similar to the one described in the news: an artifact said to hold unimaginable power, but also carry dire consequences for those who misused it. The more Harold read, the clearer it became that the warnings embedded in these stories weren't so different from the ones he'd been giving all along. These artifacts were often depicted as gifts from higher beings, bestowed upon humans with strict instructions not to abuse their power. When those instructions were ignored, disaster inevitably followed. Harold felt a chill run down his spine as he realized how closely the current situation mirrored these tales. If only someone would listen. Meanwhile, back in the lab, things were moving faster than ever. The artifact had begun behaving unpredictably, emitting bursts of light and heat that startled the researchers. Some saw these anomalies as proof of its incredible potential, while others grew uneasy. Laura, a young engineer who had recently joined the team, fell somewhere in between. She admired the groundbreaking work being done, but couldn't shake the feeling that they were playing with fire. Her instincts told her to proceed cautiously, yet the pressure to produce results left little room for hesitation. One night, as the rest of the team celebrated another milestone, Laura stayed behind to study the artifact more closely. She noticed something odd. The glowing patterns on its surface seemed to shift and rearrange themselves, almost like they were responding to her presence. It was beautiful, mesmerizing even, but also unsettling. For a brief moment, Laura wondered if Harold's warnings might hold some truth after all. Shaking off the thought, she reminded herself that fear had no place in science. Progress required boldness, not doubt. As the days turned into weeks, the artifact continued to defy explanation. Its behavior grew increasingly erratic, sometimes pulsing with energy strong enough to knock out nearby equipment. Despite these challenges, Daniel remained undeterred, convinced that they were on the verge of a monumental discovery. Rachel, however, started losing sleep over the implications of their work. What if they were unleashing something they couldn't control? What if Harold's warnings weren't nonsense after all? Unbeknownst to any of them, high above Earth's atmosphere, something stirred. Far from human eyes, a fleet of ships hovered. Silently in space, their occupants observing the planet below with keen interest. They had been watching humanity for centuries, waiting to see whether this species would prove worthy of survival or destroy itself first. When the artifact sent out its signal, it acted as both a beacon and a test. Humanity's response would determine their fate. For now, though Harold sat alone on his porch, gazing at the stars, he didn't know about the ships or the cosmic game being played out across the galaxy. All he knew was that the warnings of his ancestors were coming true and there was nothing he could do to stop it. In the heart of a sprawling underground laboratory near Denver, Colorado, Daniel Carter and his team worked around the clock. The air buzzed with excitement and tension as researchers moved between stations, analyzing data, running tests, and debating theories. The artifact sat at the center of it all, encased in a transparent containment chamber that glowed faintly with its own energy. It was unlike anything anyone had ever encountered, a smooth, metallic object etched with intricate patterns that shifted subtly when viewed from different angles. No matter how many times they studied it, the artifact seemed to hold secrets just out of reach. Daniel was the driving force behind the project, his sharp mind always racing ahead to the next possibility. He saw the artifact not as a mystery to be feared, but as an opportunity to redefine humanity's future. This could change everything, he often said, pacing the lab with restless energy. Imagine limitless clean energy, advancements in medicine, even space travel beyond our wildest dreams. We're standing on the edge of a new era. His enthusiasm was contagious, inspiring his colleagues to push harder, work longer, and dream bigger. But not everyone shared his unshakable optimism. Laura, a young engineer who had joined the team only months earlier, felt a growing unease. She had come to the project reluctantly, driven more by financial necessity than passion. After losing her previous job during an economic downturn, she accepted the position, hoping for stability. What she found instead was a whirlwind of cutting-edge science and mounting pressure. At first, Laura tried to focus solely on her tasks, calibrating equipment, troubleshooting technical issues, and ensuring the systems monitoring the artifact remained functional. But as days turned into weeks, she couldn't ignore the strange occurrences happening around her. The artifact's behavior became increasingly unpredictable. Sometimes it emitted bursts of light so bright they left after images burned into the retinas of anyone nearby. Other times, it pulsed with heat intense enough to warp metal surfaces within the lab. These anomalies frightened some of the researchers, but Daniel dismissed their concerns. "It's reacting to our experiments," he insisted. "That's how we learn. Every unexpected result brings us closer to understanding its true nature." To him, fear was just another obstacle to overcome. Rachel Monroe, the chemist leading the analysis of the artifact's composition, struggled to reconcile her scientific curiosity with her growing sense of dread. She spent hours poring over data, searching for patterns or explanations that might shed light on its erratic behavior. Yet the more she learned, the less she understood. The artifact didn't conform to any known laws of physics or chemistry. Its energy signature defied classification, and its responses to stimuli seemed almost intelligent. Late at night, when the lab grew quiet, Rachel sometimes caught herself staring at the glowing patterns on its surface, wondering if it was watching them back. Despite the challenges, progress continued. The team managed to decode fragments of the artifact's signals, revealing sequences of information that hinted at its purpose. Some interpreted these findings as evidence of advanced technology waiting to be unlocked. Others saw warnings encoded in the patterns, cautionary messages meant to deter tampering. Laura found herself torn between the two perspectives. On one hand, she admired the groundbreaking work being done. On the other, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were playing with forces far beyond their comprehension. One evening, as the rest of the team celebrated another breakthrough, Laura stayed behind to run a final diagnostic on the equipment. Alone in the dimly lit lab, she approached the containment chamber housing the artifact. Up close, it was mesmerizing. The faint glow of its surface cast shifting shadows across the walls, and the hum of its energy resonated deep in her chest. For a moment, she forgot her doubts and fears, captivated by its beauty. Then, without warning, the artifact flared brightly, sending a wave of warmth radiating outward. Startled, Laura stumbled backward, her heart pounding. "What was that?" she whispered aloud, though no one was there to answer. As the glow faded, the artifact's patterns shifted again, forming shapes that seemed vaguely familiar. Laura squinted, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. Were those symbols? Letters? Something else entirely? Before she could investigate further, alarms blared through the lab, signaling an emergency shutdown. Rushing to her station, Laura quickly realized the artifact had overloaded part of the system, causing temporary power fluctuations throughout the facility. By the time Daniel and the others returned, the situation was under control. Laura explained what had happened, omitting her suspicions about the artifact's behavior. Daniel listened intently, nodding thoughtfully before offering his assessment. "It's reacting to external stimuli," he concluded. "We need to refine our approach, adjust the parameters of our experiments." "This is good news. It means we're getting closer." Laura nodded along, but inside, she wasn't so sure. Something about the incident unsettled her, gnawing at the edges of her mind like an unanswered question. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away in the Appalachian Mountains, Harold watched the news reports with mounting dread. Stories about the artifact dominated headlines, accompanied by images of gleaming labs and confident scientists promising revolutionary discoveries. Each announcement struck him like a blow, reinforcing his belief that humanity was rushing headlong toward disaster. He tried once more to contact local authorities, writing letters and making phone calls, but his efforts yielded nothing. Frustrated and exhausted, Harold retreated to his porch, seeking solace in the quiet rhythms of nature. That night, as he gazed up at the stars, Harold noticed something unusual. A faint, pulsing light hovered above the distant peaks, flickering intermittently like a faulty bulb. At first, he thought it might be a plane or satellite, but its movement was too erratic, too deliberate. The sight filled him with a sense of foreboding, as if the universe itself was signaling a warning. Harold clenched his fists, wishing there was anything he could do to stop what was coming. But for now, all he could do was wait. Back in the lab, the team resumed their work with renewed determination. Daniel pushed them harder than ever, convinced they were on the verge of a breakthrough. Rachel continued her meticulous analyses, searching for answers in the data. And Laura, caught between awe and apprehension, threw herself into her tasks, hoping to find clarity amid the chaos. None of them knew what lay ahead, but each step forward brought them closer to unlocking the artifact's secret sand, perhaps unleashing consequences none of them could foresee. As the days passed, the artifact's influence began to seep into their lives in subtle ways. Dreams became vivid and unsettling, filled with swirling lights and indistinct voices. Equipment malfunctioned more frequently, requiring constant repairs. Even interpersonal dynamics shifted, with tensions rising and tempers flaring over minor disagreements. Despite these signs, the researchers pressed on, blinded by ambition or bound by duty. Only Laura occasionally paused to wonder if they were chasing something they shouldn't. But in a world obsessed with progress, questioning the path forward was a lonely endeavor indeed. Late one night, the artifact did something no one expected. While the lab was mostly empty, save for a skeleton crew monitoring its activity, it suddenly emitted a burst of energy so powerful that it knocked out every system in the facility. Lights flickered and died, computers crashed, and alarms blared deafeningly before falling silent. In the chaos, the containment chamber housing the artifact shattered, sending shards of glass scattering across the floor. The artifact itself floated upward, suspended in mid-air, as if defying gravity, and began pulsing with an intense, rhythmic light. Laura, who had been working late in an adjacent room, rushed to the scene, her heart pounding. She froze at the doorway, watching in stunned silence as the artifact sent out a beam of light that shot straight through the ceiling and into the sky above. It wasn't just a random flare, it was deliberate, like a signal. For several long moments, nothing happened. Then, faintly at first, but growing louder, a low hum filled the air. It wasn't coming from the artifact anymore. It was coming from outside. The researchers scrambled to regain control of their equipment, but nothing worked. Power remained out across the entire facility, leaving them reliant on emergency flashlights. Daniel arrived shortly after, his face pale but determined. "What's going on?" he demanded, though no one had answers. All eyes were fixed on the artifact, which now hovered motionless, its glow dimming slightly. The hum grew louder still, vibrating through the walls and rattling loose objects on nearby shelves. Laura felt a strange pressure in her chest, as if the air itself had become heavier, and then it stopped. The sudden silence was almost worse than the noise. Everyone stood frozen, unsure of what to do next. That's when they noticed a faint shimmer in the sky outside, visible even through the reinforced windows of the lab. At first, it looked like a distortion, like heat waves rising off asphalt on a summer day. But as they watched, the shimmer resolved into shapes. Massive, sleek ships descended silently from the heavens, their surfaces reflecting the moonlight in eerie patterns. They didn't land. Instead, they hovered above the facility, casting long shadows over the surrounding landscape. Panic rippled through the team. Some wanted to run, others argued for caution, and a few simply stared, unable to process what they were seeing. Daniel, ever the pragmatist, grabbed a flashlight and stepped toward the exit. "We need to see this up close," he said firmly. Laura hesitated, torn between fear and curiosity. Eventually, she followed him, along with a small group of researchers. Together, they ventured outside, squinting against the unnatural brightness cast by the alien vessels. The ships were enormous, dwarfing everything around them. Their designs were sleek and otherworldly, with smooth curves and glowing panels that pulsed softly. There were no visible engines or thrusters, yet they hung perfectly still in the air, exuding an aura of calm authority. As the humans approached cautiously, one of the ships lowered itself slightly, extending a narrow platform that touched down gently on the ground. From it emerged figures tall, slender beings with luminous skin and elongated limbs. Their eyes glowed faintly, and their movements were fluid, almost hypnotic. For a moment, neither side moved. Humans and extraterrestrials regarded each other warily, separated by a gulf of unknowns. Then, without warning, the beings began communicating not with words, but with bursts of light and sound that emanated from their bodies. Patterns of color danced across their skin, accompanied by melodic tones that resonated deep within the humans' minds. It wasn't language in any traditional sense, but somehow, the message came through clearly. "We are the Valens." Daniel took a step forward, raising his hands in what he hoped was a gesture of peace. "Who are you?" he asked aloud, his voice trembling despite his best efforts to remain composed. The Valens responded by intensifying their display, projecting images directly into the researchers' thoughts. They saw visions of stars forming and dying, planets teeming with life, and civilizations rising and falling. It was overwhelming, beautiful, and terrifying all at once, through fragmented impressions rather than coherent sentences. The Valens conveyed their purpose. They were observers, guardians of balance in the universe. They had watched humanity for centuries, intrigued by its rapid evolution and boundless ambition. When the artifact sent its signal, it acted as both a beacon and a test. Now, the Valens had come to assess whether humanity was ready to wield such power, or if it posed a threat to the delicate equilibrium of existence. As the initial shock wore off, questions flooded the researchers' minds. Why had the artifact called to them? What did the Valens want? Were they friends or foes? Daniel, eager to seize the opportunity, stepped closer. "If you're here to help us, we welcome your guidance," he said, choosing his words carefully. "But we also have much to offer. Together, we can achieve greatness." The Valens paused, their glowing forms flickering briefly. Through another series of lights and sounds, they warned humanity against continuing its experiments with the artifact. Its power, they explained, was not meant to be harnessed recklessly. To tamper with it further risked destabilizing forces far beyond human understanding. Laura listened intently, her earlier unease crystallizing into dread. These beings weren't just visitors, they were arbiters, judging humanity's worthiness. But Daniel refused to back down. "You don't understand," he insisted. "We're trying to improve our world, to create a better future. If you have knowledge or technology to share, why withhold it? Isn't that selfish?" The Valens' response was immediate and unyielding. Their lights pulsed faster, bathing the area in sharp staccato bursts. The message was clear. Humanity's arrogance bordered on recklessness. Still, they offered a compromise. In exchange for halting all research on the artifact, they would provide advanced technology to aid humanity's development, but only under strict conditions. Progress must align with harmony, not domination. Back in the Appalachian Mountains, Harold sat on his porch, staring at the horizon. He couldn't see the alien ships from where he lived, but he felt their presence in the charged atmosphere. Strange lights continued to hover over the peaks, and the air carried an electric tension that made his skin prickle. Picking up his old radio, he tuned it to a news station, hoping for updates. Reports poured in about unidentified craft appearing worldwide, sparking panic and wonder in equal measure. Governments scrambled to respond, while civilians speculated wildly about the nature of the visitors. Harold sighed heavily. shaking his head. They've awakened something they can't control, he muttered to himself. His warnings, once dismissed as paranoia, now seemed tragically prescient. Yet even he couldn't have predicted this outcome. Humanity hadn't just attracted attention, had summoned judgment. By morning, word of the Valens spread across the globe. Social media buzzed with videos and photos of the ships, grainy and distorted but undeniable proof of their existence. World leaders convened emergency meetings, debating how to handle the situation. Scientists debated theories about the Valens' origins and intentions, while ordinary people grappled with the implications of first contact. Excitement mingled with fear, hope clashed with uncertainty. In Denver, the researchers returned to the lab, shaken but resolute. Daniel immediately began drafting proposals to negotiate with the Valens, convinced that humanity could sway them to share more of their knowledge. Rachel, however, urged caution, reminding everyone of the Valens' warnings. They're not here to give us shortcuts, she argued. They're testing us. Pushing too hard might make things worse. Laura found herself caught between the two perspectives, her instincts telling her to trust Rachel's caution, even as Daniel's confidence pulled her in the opposite direction. As the days passed, the Valens maintained their vigil, their ships remaining stationed above key locations around the world. Communication attempts continued, though progress was slow and fraught with misunderstandings. Humanity's eagerness to learn clashed with the Valens' measured approach, creating friction that threatened to derail negotiations entirely. Meanwhile, the artifact remained inert, its surface dull and lifeless since the initial activation. Without its energy, the lab felt eerily quiet, as if holding its breath. Despite the challenges, one thing became clear. Humanity's encounter with the Valens marked a turning point. Whether it led to enlightenment or catastrophe depended on choices yet to be made. For now, the world held its collective breath, waiting to see what would happen next. And somewhere in the mountains, an old man named Harold watched the skies, praying that humanity would finally listen not to him, but to the wisdom of those who had come before. The days following the Valens' arrival were a whirlwind of activity and uncertainty. Governments around the world convened emergency sessions, scrambling to formulate a unified response to humanity's first contact with extraterrestrial beings. Scientists debated feverishly about the implications of the Valens' presence, while ordinary people reacted in ways that ranged from awe to outright panic. Some saw the aliens as saviors, offering salvation through advanced technology. Others viewed them as invaders waiting for the right moment to strike. Amid the chaos, Daniel Carter became a central figure, advocating for bold action and pushing humanity to seize what he saw as an unprecedented opportunity. Daniel's vision was clear. The Valens possessed knowledge and tools that could catapult humanity into a new age of prosperity. He believed their warnings about the artifact were merely cautionary tales, meant to ensure responsible use, not outright prohibitions. To him, the key was negotiation. If humanity demonstrated its worthiness and ambition, the Valens would surely share more of their secrets. With this mindset, Daniel worked tirelessly to draft proposals aimed at convincing the extraterrestrials to collaborate further. He argued that humanity's relentless drive for progress made it uniquely qualified to handle such power responsibly. Rachel Monroe, however, remained deeply skeptical. While she acknowledged the potential benefits of working with the Valens, her cautious nature kept her grounded in reality. She had spent years studying the artifact's erratic behavior and knew firsthand how unpredictable its energy could be. The Valens' warnings weren't vague suggestions. They were stark reminders of the dangers humanity faced if it continued down its current path. Rachel worried that Daniel's eagerness to push forward blinded him to the risks. "We're dealing with forces we don't understand," she told him one evening in the lab. "If we rush into this without fully grasping the consequences, we could destroy ourselves." Laura found herself caught between these two perspectives. On one hand, she admired Daniel's confidence and shared his excitement about the possibilities ahead. On the other, Rachel's concerns resonated deeply with her growing unease. Laura had always been someone who trusted her instincts, and lately, those instincts screamed caution. She remembered the strange sensation she'd felt during the artifact's activation, the pressure in her chest, the vivid dreams, and wondered if there were signs of something larger at play. Yet, like many others, she struggled to reconcile her fears with the allure of progress. Meanwhile, the Valens maintained their silent vigil, observing humanity's reactions with what seemed like detached curiosity. Their ships remained stationed above major cities and research facilities, casting long shadows over the landscapes below. Occasionally, they communicated through bursts of light and sound, reinforcing their earlier message: balance must be preserved. They emphasized that their role was not to dictate humanity's future, but to guide it provided humanity proved capable of restraint. This stance infuriated figures like Senator Emily Grant, a powerful politician known for her aggressive advocacy of technological advancement. To her, the Valens' reluctance to share freely was unacceptable. Humanity had earned the right to determine its own destiny, and no alien entity should stand in the way. In televised speeches, she rallied public support for a more assertive approach. "We cannot allow fear to hold us back," she declared. "The Valens have much to offer, and we must demand access to their knowledge. This is our chance to secure a brighter future for generations to come." Her words struck a chord with many, fueling a growing movement that pressured world leaders to adopt a harder line. Protests erupted in cities worldwide, with some groups calling for immediate collaboration with the Valens and others demanding complete independence from their influence. The divide grew wider each day, threatening to fracture global unity. At a critical juncture, against this backdrop of tension, Harold sat alone on his porch, watching the horizon. The strange lights hovering over the mountains had grown brighter, their movements more deliberate. He couldn't shake the feeling that something monumental was unfolding, something far beyond human control. His warnings had gone unheeded for so long that he almost felt resigned to the inevitability of disaster. Still, a small part of him clung to hope that humanity might yet heed the lessons of the past. One evening, Harold decided to take matters into his own hands. Gathering his courage, he traveled to Denver, determined to speak directly to the researchers working with the artifact. Though he doubted anyone would listen, he felt compelled to try. When he arrived at the lab, he was met with skepticism and thinly veiled impatience. Daniel dismissed him outright, brushing off his concerns as irrelevant superstition. But Laura, moved by his sincerity, agreed to hear him out. Harold recounted stories passed down through generations, tales of ancient civilizations that had risen and fallen after discovering artifacts similar to the one now under study. These objects, he explained, were often gifts from higher powers, but gifts came with conditions. Those who respected the rules prospered, those who ignored them faced ruin. As he spoke, Laura listened intently, her doubts crystallizing into clarity. There was truth in Harold's words, even if they lacked scientific evidence. Perhaps the artifact wasn't just a tool, it was a test, just as the Valens had implied. Inspired by Harold's visit, Laura began voicing her concerns more openly within the team. She urged them to consider the broader implications of their work and questioned whether humanity was truly ready for the responsibilities that came with such power. Her arguments initially fell on deaf ears, drowned out by Daniel's unwavering optimism. But as the Valens' presence lingered and tensions escalated, others started to listen. The turning point came when the artifact suddenly reactivated. It had lain dormant since the initial encounter with the Valens, its surface dull and lifeless. But one night, without warning, it flared brightly, emitting a pulse of energy that reverberated throughout the facility. Lights flickered, equipment malfunctioned, and the containment chamber hummed with renewed intensity. The researchers scrambled to contain the situation, but the artifact's behavior was unlike anything they'd seen before. Its patterns shifted rapidly, forming shapes that seemed almost communicative. Laura stared at the artifact, her heart racing. She realized then that it wasn't merely reacting to external stimuli, it was responding to humanity's collective actions. Every decision, every argument, every act of defiance or restraint influenced its behavior. The realization hit her like a thunderclap. The artifact wasn't just a relic of the past, it was a reflection of humanity's present and, perhaps its future. As the artifact pulsed steadily, the Valens ships descended closer to the ground. Their glowing forms cast eerie shadows across the lab, and their melodic tones filled the air once again. This time, their message was unmistakable. Humanity stood at a crossroads. One path led to harmony and coexistence, the other to chaos and destruction. The choice was theirs to make. Daniel, undeterred by the gravity of the moment, doubled down on his insistence that humanity deserved full access to the Valens' knowledge. If they won't give it willingly, we'll find another way, he declared, his voice tinged with desperation. Rachel and Laura exchanged worried glances, knowing that such defiance could provoke disastrous consequences. Even Harold, standing quietly in the corner, shook his head sadly. He had warned them all along, and now his worst fears were coming true. In the end, it wasn't the scientists or politicians who made the final decision, it was the artifact itself. As the debate raged on, its glow intensified until it filled the entire room with blinding light. Then, with a sudden burst of energy, it sent out a signal that echoed across the globe. The Valens ships responded instantly, retreating into the sky and disappearing from view. For a brief moment, silence reigned. When the light faded, the artifact lay inert once more, its surface cold and lifeless. The researchers stood frozen, unsure of what had just happened. Had they succeeded in unlocking its secrets, or had they pushed too far? Only time would tell. And somewhere in the distance, Harold sighed heavily, knowing that humanity's journey was far from over. The disappearance of the Valens ships left humanity in a state of shock and confusion. One moment, their towering vessels had dominated the skies, casting long shadows over cities and filling the air with an otherworldly hum. The next, they were gone, leaving behind only silence and unanswered questions. For a while, people stood frozen, staring at the empty spaces where the ships had been, as if expecting them to reappear. But they didn't. Instead, the world was plunged into uncertainty, a fragile calm that felt more like the eye of a storm than true peace. In Denver, the researchers gathered in the lab, their faces pale and drawn. The artifact sat motionless in its containment chamber, its surface dull and lifeless once again. Yet no one dared approach it. The memory of its sudden reactivation and the subsequent departure of the Valens was still fresh in their minds. Laura paced nervously, her thoughts racing. What had happened? Had the artifact's signal driven the Valens away, or had it somehow forced them to retreat? And what did this mean for humanity? Daniel, ever the optimist, refused to accept defeat. "This isn't over," he insisted, his voice steady, despite the tension in the room. "They're testing us, that's all. If we can figure out how to communicate with them again, we can still make this work." His confidence bordered on stubbornness, but it wasn't entirely unwarranted. Humanity had faced challenges before, and each time, it had risen to meet them. Why should this be any different? Rachel, however, wasn't so sure. "We need to tread carefully," she said, her tone measured, but firm. "The Valens didn't leave because they gave up, they left because we pushed too far. Look at what happened when the artifact flared. It wasn't just reacting to us. It was responding to our choices. Every decision we made influenced its behavior. Do you really think ignoring their warnings is going to end well?" Laura nodded slowly, her unease growing with every word Rachel spoke. She remembered the strange sensations she'd felt during The artifact's activation, the pressure in her chest, the vivid dreams filled with swirling lights and indistinct voices. At the time, she'd dismissed them as stress or exhaustion, but now she wondered if they were something more. Could the artifact have been trying to communicate with her directly? If so, what message had it been sending? Outside the lab, the world grappled with the aftermath of the Valen's departure. Social media buzzed with speculation, conspiracy theories, and wild rumors. Some saw the aliens' exit as proof that humanity had passed their test, earning their trust and paving the way for future collaboration. Others believed the opposite, that the Valens had abandoned Earth, deeming humanity unworthy of their guidance. Governments scrambled to issue statements reassuring the public, but their words rang hollow against the backdrop of fear and uncertainty. Senator Emily Grant, undeterred by the Valens' absence, seized the opportunity to push her agenda even harder. In televised speeches, she framed the situation not as a failure, but as a challenge to overcome. The Valens may have left, but their technology remains within our reach, she declared, her voice brimming with conviction. We cannot afford to sit idly by while others take the lead. This is our chance to claim our destiny and secure a brighter future for all. Her rhetoric resonated with many, fueling a growing movement that demanded immediate action. Protests erupted in cities worldwide, with crowds chanting slogans like "No fear, only progress and humanity first." Supporters argued that waiting for the Valens' return was a waste of time. Instead, humanity should focus on unlocking the secrets of the artifact itself. After all, hadn't the aliens already demonstrated that such power existed? Why rely on outsiders when humans could harness it themselves? But not everyone shared this view. Critics warned that rushing forward without fully understanding the risks could lead to catastrophe. Scientists outside the Denver team voiced concerns about the artifact's erratic behavior, pointing to evidence that suggested its energy might be inherently unstable. Environmental activists highlighted reports of unusual phenomena occurring near areas where fragments of the artifact had been transported. Strange weather patterns, unexplained illnesses, and bizarre mutations in plants and animals. These anomalies raised troubling questions about the long-term effects of exposure to the artifact's energy. Amid the chaos, Harold watched from afar, feeling both vindicated and heartbroken. His warnings, once dismissed as paranoia, now seemed tragically prescient. Yet instead of heeding his advice, humanity appeared poised to repeat the same mistakes. Sitting on his porch, he stared at the horizon, his mind heavy with regret. They never listen, he muttered to himself. Not until it's too late. Back in the lab, tensions continued to rise. Daniel pressed ahead with plans to study the artifact further, convinced that unlocking its secrets would bring the Valens back, or at least provide humanity with the tools needed to thrive without their help. Rachel and Laura, however, grew increasingly uneasy. They noticed subtle changes in the artifact's appearance, tiny cracks forming along its surface, and faint glimmers of light flickering deep within. To them, these signs suggested instability, as if the object itself was beginning to deteriorate. One night, Laura stayed late in the lab, unable to shake the feeling that something was wrong. She approached the containment chamber cautiously, her flashlight casting jittery shadows across the walls. As she studied the artifact, she noticed something new. The patterns etched into its surface seemed to shift slightly under her gaze, almost like they were alive. Before she could react, the artifact pulsed weakly, emitting a soft glow that bathed the room in eerie light. Then, unexpectedly, it released a burst of energy that knocked her off her feet. When Laura came to, she found herself lying on the floor, her head throbbing and her vision blurred. The artifact's glow had faded, but its patterns now moved faster, swirling in dizzying circles. Panic gripped her as she realized what was happening. It wasn't just reacting anymore, it was unraveling. Desperate to warn the others, she staggered to her feet and ran toward the exit, shouting for help. By the time Daniel and Rachel arrived, the artifact's behavior had escalated dramatically. Its surface cracked open in places, revealing veins of pulsating light beneath. The air grew thick with static electricity, making it hard to breathe. Equipment around the lab malfunctioned, sparks flying from overloaded circuits. "We need to shut it down," Rachel shouted, her voice barely audible over the rising hum. "No," Daniel snapped, his eyes wild with determination. "If we can stabilize it, we might still learn something valuable." "We're out of time," Lara yelled, gesturing frantically at the artifact. "It's breaking apart. We have to get out of here." Reluctantly, Daniel relented, and the three of them fled the lab moments before the artifact unleashed a massive surge of energy. The explosion shattered the containment chamber, sending shock waves rippling through the facility. Alarms blared deafeningly as emergency systems kicked in, sealing off affected areas and initiating evacuation protocols. When the dust settled, the artifact was gone, reduced to fragments scattered across the lab. But its influence lingered. Those who had been exposed to its energy began experiencing strange side effects, heightened senses, bursts of unnatural strength, and vivid hallucinations. Some reported seeing ghostly figures or hearing whispers in languages they didn't recognize. Others felt an overwhelming sense of connection to places and people they'd never met, as if their minds had been opened to dimensions beyond human comprehension. As news of these transformations spread, panic swept through the scientific community. Researchers scrambled to understand what had happened, collecting data and running tests on affected individuals. Early findings suggested that the artifact's energy had altered human biology on a fundamental level, rewriting genetic codes and reshaping neural pathways. While some hailed these changes as evidence of evolution, others feared they marked the beginning of something far darker. In rural areas, reports surfaced of people disappearing without a trace. Entire families vanished overnight, leaving behind empty homes and cryptic symbols scrawled on walls. Witnesses claimed to have seen strange lights hovering in the sky, accompanied by eerie sounds that echoed through the countryside. Harold, watching from his cabin, recognized these accounts as echoes of ancient legends, tales of beings who walked among humans, offering gifts that carried hidden costs. Despite the mounting evidence of danger, humanity's response remained divided. Some embraced the changes, seeing them as proof of progress and potential. Others resisted, clinging to what remained of normalcy. Governments struggled to maintain order, imposing strict regulations on artifact research, while simultaneously funding covert projects aimed at replicating its effects. The line between caution and ambition blurred, replaced by a desperate race to adapt or dominate. For Laura, the transformation was both exhilarating and terrifying. She found herself capable of feats she'd never imagined possible, lifting heavy objects with ease, solving complex problems in seconds, and sensing emotions in others with uncanny accuracy. Yet these abilities came at a cost. Her dreams became more vivid, bordering on nightmares, filled with images of destruction and despair. She couldn't shake the feeling that the artifact's energy had awakened something inside her, something she didn't fully understand.